everybody. So, welcome to week 4. You've done it. You're pretty much halfway there. Yeah, after this week, we're halfway there, literally. So, this week we're going to talk about bones and joints. So, chapter 7 and 8. So, and unfortunately, if you noticed, I'm in my office because, unfortunately, actually, not unfortunately, actually, it's a good thing. They're waxing my lab this week, so I, I don't like getting in the way of the janitors because they do so much for us. Always be nice to the janitors, and unless they kidnap your snake, but that's a different story. Anyway, so yeah, Monty's also at home shedding. I'm still waiting for him to shed. Um, so yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. I had to turn off my watch so it didn't dong at me every 5 seconds. Alrighty, with that said, let's go ahead and talk about dem bones. Which also reminds me, I don't have my boxo bones because it's in the lab. That they are waxing the floor, which is a good thing. Because the floors need to be protected from all the stuff that we do in that lab. Anyway, so what do our bones do for us other than, making us so we can stand up and sit up and, not be a big tub of goo? Well, they do quite a bit for us. So, first thing is they actually help us with the formation of red blood cells in the red marrow. So that's called hematopoiesis. And we actually will be talking about that starting pretty much right off the bat next semester. We're going to be talking about red blood cells and red blood cell formation and all that fun jazz there. But basically, know that this is the formation of red blood cells and that's where it comes from. Another thing that our bones do for us is actually inorganic salt storage. So our human body needs calcium, especially for moving our muscles, and we talked about this, and we're going to talk about it again when we talk about the muscles. So for very many processes, so we actually kind of hoard our calcium in bones and we take it out as needed. So this helps not only our muscles but our neurons and maintains our metabolism as well. So we kind of like hoard our calcium there for, lots and lots of decent purposes of keeping us alive and running. Yay! So our skeletons do a lot more than just hold us up. Although holding us up is pretty important too. Now, how do we classify bones? Again, there's different ways of classifying some of these things. And the first thing is we classify them basically where they are in your body. For instance, your skull, your backbone, and your ribs are part of your axial skeleton. So again, and then your appendicular skeleton is the bones that make up your shoulders and your arms and your fingers and your pelvis and your legs and your feet. So appendicular, again, appendage, appendicular, axial, like we're on an axis. That's kind of how I think of it. Hopefully that helps you too. Now, I'm not going to sit here and make you memorize all 206 bones. And yes, by the way, you have 206 bones in your body, give or take. I do go after certain ones, though, so you know them. The reason I know bones is actually, this is an insane story, is because one of my professors was old school, and I mean old school, and he was rough. And over spring break, I was taking a zoology course, and he wanted us to memorize. Now, keep in mind, I'd had anatomy and physiology way earlier, and we were not asked to memorize the bones. But in the zoology course I was taking, he each handed us a box. And in this box was an entire cat skeleton. And he said, you need to memorize all of it, and you'll be tested on it the minute you get back from spring break. Because he didn't think spring break should have been a thing. I'm like, whoa. Yeah, good old Dr. Bruce. Amazing photographer, excellent. He was into reptiles big time. But his classes were rough. Anyway. So yeah, that's kind of how I learned the skeletal system. I didn't do so hot on that exam, but I really did learn the skeletal system. So we will be talking about different types, and I will be pointing out certain things to understand. For instance, our vertebra. Um, the vertebral column has 26 in it, which is 24 vertebra, one sacrum. We'll talk about that, and the coccyx, which is your tailbone, which I've broken several times, and I'll tell you about that as well. But I will be going over like the difference in ribs. I will be going over the difference in your vertebra. So I won't be asking you to memorize all 206 bones. I will be asking you to know the difference between certain types, because that's what I feel is more pertinent. I'm not one to ask about oh god, memorization, because I don't feel memorization helps anyone, because after I memorize something, it's outside of my brain. I believe in the more you use it, the better you know it. That's my 2 cents, but that's why I'm asking you to know some differences between. It'll make more sense when you get there. So we've got the skull, which is a whole bunch of flat bones merged together, and we'll talk about how that came about. We got the middle ear bones. The middle ear bones are really interesting because they are the tiniest bones in your body. And if I can get in the lab, I will go get. I actually have them in a little container, so you can actually see how tiny they are. The hyoid bone, which is right here. Actually, fun fact. For those of you that are into the murder shows, like I seem to be, those true crime podcasts and stuff like that, where it's like whodunit, and we're all listening to the gruesome details of the murders and whatnot. The hyoid bone, actually, if it's cracked, that usually indicates that somebody's been either, choked to death. Usually when somebody's like choking them like this with their thumbs on it, it usually cracks the hyoid bone. So it's a dead giveaway somebody got choked. That and marks around your neck. I think it's kind of. So, FYI. Vertebral column, like I said, we'll be talking about that. And the thoracic cage, which protects our lungs and our heart and, other organs that we kind of need protected. So that way, hopefully nothing damages them. Except us. So anyway, so there you go. Again, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh yes, you must memorize all of these bones, because the cranium itself and the face, oh my god, the facial bones, there's a lot. But I would like you to be able to pick out specific differences. So again, here we have the appendicular skeleton. Again, basically we've got our pectoral girdle. Now we have a pectoral girdle up here, and then we got our pelvic girdle down here. And so that's the scapula and the clavicle. And if you've ever, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes my clavicle pops, and oh my god, that's such it goes through you like, whoa. I don't know why. It's like somebody setting off a freaking sound bomb. It pops, and you're like, whoa. You got the upper limbs and the lower limbs. And then you're going to get into words that I enjoy saying a lot. Like, for instance, you got, your wrist is your metacarpals. And then you've got your phalanges, which make up your fingers. And it's also the phalanges you'll notice down here also for your toes. So your phalanges, which are your fingers, and your toes. And I'd pull my toes up right now, but I'm not that bendable. Anyway, flexible. That's the word I'm looking for. Flexible. So anyway, phalanges. I just like saying phalanges. So you might expect a test question on phalanges just because I like saying phalanges. So anyway, most of us adults have 206 bones, which was actually interesting. I shocked somebody by knowing that. We had to go to the ER one year because my son decided to swallow a Mario coin, which was this slug metal in yellow plastic, and I don't know why. He was chewing on it, and he accidentally swallowed it, and it was on the first day off of the summer break, and I'm standing there with my cup of coffee going, I'm gonna relax. Did I relax that day? No. But anyway, it was funny. We were talking to one of the nurses, and he looked at my son, and he goes, how many bones are in the human body, do you think? And Wesley instantly, because he knows his mommy, turns to me and goes, Mommy, how many bones? And so I lean over and I go, 206. And then he goes, 206. And he goes, wow. He goes, I know some nurses that didn't even know that. And I'm like, ooh. Anyway, I'm not saying you should know all the bones in the body. I'm just saying, Anyway, we kind of classify them according to their shapes. So you got your long bones, which are basically the ones we always think about, the long ones with the expanded ends, your thigh bone, your arm bones. You got your short bones, which are cube-like, roughly equal to length and wise, which is usually your metacarpals. So you basically right here in your wrists and your ankles. We also have a kind of a subset of those, which is your sesamoid or round bone. These are basically round bones, very small, nodular, which is your kneecap. Or your friend, the patella. Again, there's another word I like saying, the patella. Yes. Also, probably a test question. Anyway, flat bones are plate-like, which are ribs, your scapula, and your skull. Even though, but your head is round. Yeah, we call them flat bones because they're flattish. Again, nobody asked me these questions. And I wasn't there when they named these things. It's just the way it is now. So, and then you got your irregular bones, which is your backbone and your facial bones. And oh boy, your facial bones are so irregular, and there's so many of them. And I feel bad anytime it's like somebody gets major facial damage and has to get facial reconstruction because, oh God, there are so many bones. Anyway, now, we're going to be looking at long bones a lot because we love talking about them, and it's usually the bone that we're always talking about. So there's two types of marrow in the bones, and that is the red marrow and the yellow marrow. Now, all bone marrow starts off red, but it turns yellow over time, except for in your face, your ribs, your sternum, and your clavicles. However, if you need more red blood cells, we can actually switch this yellow marrow back to red marrow so it can kick into red marrow production. So only red marrow makes the red blood cells, but a lot of the marrow in our bones are actually yellow. But we can flip it back to red when we need to, which is kind of cool, I think. Kind of neat. Usually you don't usually see that in your body. You don't usually see where it's like, oh, well, we need more red blood cells. Quick, flip the yellow to red. Now, how it does that, I am not quite sure. I don't think your book goes into it either. It just does that. Hey, it might be something to study in the future. Cool. Now, if we're looking at the structure of a long bone also, we're going to notice some things. For instance, we've got some names for the parts. So if you're looking at the top part, it's proximal epiphysis. Excuse me. Diphysis is right here. Diphysis. Epiphysis. There we go. Epiphysis are the ends. The middle is the diphysis. There we go. I got it. So proximal, of course, is above the distal from chapter 1 when hopefully you got proximal, distal, all that fun jazz. So anyway, now there's a couple of things you're going to notice. That we've got the compact bone on the outside, and then we've got spongy bone on the inside. In the spongy bone is all of these, we've got, blood vessels running through, all this fun stuff. Why do we have spongy bone inside this compact bone? Well, it's that way we can take, a twist to our bones, which, sometimes we do when we're moving our arms and our legs and we're doing the fun dancy stuff. We actually get some torque to our bones, and our bones can't be completely solid because it needs to deal with that stress without completely fracturing. And, if you take it too far, it's going to fracture, and then you get spiral fractures, which are... But anyway... So, long story short, we have the spongy bone. It actually makes it so our bones are a little bit more elastic, so it can take forces in, unintended directions without it just completely snapping. Actually, fun fact, there's a reason why insects aren't huge anymore. Insects used to be really kind of big back in the day because there was a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere. And this was actually a bit before dinosaurs, or actually as dinosaurs were up and coming. Eons ago. Keep in mind, this is eons ago. And it's funny because why don't we see that now? There's two reasons. The first reason is not enough oxygen in the atmosphere to make them that big anymore. and number two, to run their bodies because they were rather inefficient at that size. But with an overabundance of oxygen, it was possible. Also, too, because if we actually scaled up, like, say, an ant to the size of like a dog or something, yeah, it might be able to hang out for a while, but its exoskeleton will actually crack under the weight. Their exoskeletons, which are, because they have their skeletons on the outside, which is why they're shiny and crunchy when you smush them, ish, kind of. I don't smush. But, usually politely take them outside and yeet them into the space. Anyway, so, but, yeah, gravity doesn't do so good on exoskeletons at a certain size. That's why a lot of the larger animals switch to endoskeletons, because they take the gravity of larger animals way better. So there's a reason why a lot of larger animals these days have endoskeletons, and you don't see giant ants the size of dogs, which is probably a good thing, because there's a type of ant called the army ant. Look them up sometime. They're scary. Anyway, not looking. It's scary what they do in a group. They look like an ant, but what they do is insane. Look them up sometime. Anyway, this is why you don't sleep on the floor in a jungle, because an army ant troop might be walking through and there might be nothing left of you by the time they leave. Yeah. So anyway, where were we? Bones. Anyway, so again, you will also notice we have articular cartilage around the ends. This is, again, to have a nice slippery surface, because gosh knows you don't want bone-on-bone pain. I mean, ask somebody who's needed, knee replacements and hip replacements and, the joints, how fun that is, because it's not. So we usually have articular cartilage, especially over and protecting the ends that are going to be in, like, joints and whatnot. So that way, we don't, bone-on-bone grinding is not a good thing in anything. In any shape or way, which is why we have come up with, hip and joint replacements. So now you'll also notice here is this epiphyseal, epiphysis. Yeah, there we go. Epiphysis, diaphysis. Yeah, I don't know why I'm saying these things so funny today. Epiphyseal line right here. Now, this is a mammal thing, and basically you will find this in us. You will not find this in Monty or any other reptile. And this is a plate right here that when the bone is growing, like my son, he's 9, his is not an epiphyseal line, it's an epiphyseal plate. And it allows the bone to actually keep growing longer and longer and longer. However, when you hit puberty, this stops and it turns into the epiphyseal line, and we can still see that. And I'll talk more about this as bones, as structure grows, but this is pretty important, especially in growing children. But now with us as adults, ours is pretty much turned into compact bone, and we don't get growing anymore. Interestingly enough, reptiles do have this, but the crazy part is theirs never stops and solidifies. Theirs keeps going and going and going. So reptiles actually keep growing and growing and growing. But, age span and stuff, it usually, they slow down to a glacier crawl in growth. It isn't like they're just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger forever, like Monty. He's actually an adult, and granted, he grows a bit still, but not like he did when he was young. So, it slows down to a crawl, but they're still growing, because theirs keeps going, doesn't turn into a line. The plate just keeps going. And we'll talk more about that later. It's just kind of an interesting thing about how bones grow and how we get taller over time, when you're like, wait a second, if this is all compact bone, how do we add on more? Oh, there comes a fun dance. Anyway, and that fun dance is right here. There are 4 main types of bone cells. So you got your osteogenic cells, which are your stem cells that make pretty much the rest of the 3. You got your osteocyte, which is basically your main bone cell. He's the one that kind of sits in those lacuna We mentioned that earlier, those little holes in the bones. He actually sits in those, and he has these dendrites sticking out that are actually like sensors for him to let him know if there's a micro crack or something. So he's kind of sitting there watching. Now, and then we have the osteoblasts, and these guys form bone matrix, which you think the naming is a little backwards. I think the word blast, and I think something exploding, but it's not. It's the one that builds the bone, because blast or blastula has a lot to do with growing. So that's why they're called an osteoblast. Not because they blow it up, but because they put it down. So these guys are the ones that form bone matrix. Then you've got your osteoclasts. These are the ones that dissolve bone and reabsorb it. And we're constantly doing this. So we are constantly actually breaking down our bones and rebuilding them all the time, especially if you exercise, which is a good thing. It actually makes our bones stronger. So you actually replace your entire skeleton every 3 years. Yeah. Crazy. So yeah, you basically you're regrowing your bones right now. Can you feel it? I can't. See, you're very busy on a microcellular level. You really need to tell that. It's like when somebody accuses you of being lazy, sit there and tell them, no, I'm very busy on a microcellular level. I'm regrowing my bones right now. Let them know. Anyway. So these guys are really interesting, and we're going to go into how they reform. So again, if we look, we'll get to that in a minute. So let's go ahead and look at bones and how they look. So again, if you look at the bone, we've got, again, we're taking, a part of a long bone here. And if you look at it, again, you get the spongy bone on the inside, the compact bone on the outside. The compact bone has all these rings over and over again, and those rings are basically where you're finding the living cells and not just the calcium matrix. Also, there's the holes coming up. So you've got your central canal or Haveston canal, which is basically where your veins and arteries are running around inside of your bones. And then you've got rings around this, which are called osteons. So this is from it growing and growing and growing. And just like the rings of a tree, you get the rings too as you're growing. So trees and us are very similar, except made with different things completely. Anyway, so these lines are called the lamellae. And in the lamellae, again, they form around the central canal, and there's these little holes. And these little holes are called the lacunae. And the lacunae is where these osteocytes live. And they're actually kind of feeling the walls around them to see if there's any microfractures. And if there's microfractures, we start doing something really cool called remodeling. We'll get into that in a second. So this is basically what I'm trying to show you in the compact bone is, yeah, it's very compact, but there's still layers and rings to it, the osteons. So here's an osteon with its rings, and it's got the central canal where the veins and arteries are. And so we're made up of basically long circles. We're made up of more tubes. Anyway. And like I said, these lacunae is where the osteocytes live. And sometimes when we're doing stuff, we get little microfractures in between. So hopefully this gives you kind of an overview of how your compact bone looks, which I think is just really fascinating that we actually have like rings and rings of these osteons that as we grow and develop, they put more layers on them, kind of like rings of a tree. So it's kind of neat. I just think it's just neat looking to me. I mean, look at that. It just looks so cool. These are from electron microscopes. I love electron microscopes. So how do your bones grow? So all bones start of one of two sources. You got your intramembranous bones, which basically originate from a sheet-like layer of connective tissues, like your flat bones, your clavicles, your sternums, and this makes bones. It's called intramembranous ossification. So basically it's a sheet, and over time the sheet just, ossifies and turns into bone. So it goes from cartilage pretty much to bone. Endochronal bones basically start as hyaline cartilage, then is later replaced as bone tissue, most bones. To make bones form, we call this chondrial ossification. So again, you can see here fetal cartilage, and then we basically start ossifying it from the inside out. And we have a better picture of that over here. So again, formation of bone, what happens is basically hyaline cartilage, and we've got a primary ossification center, and so the inside is turning the hyaline cartilage into bone, and then the spongy bone grows first, and then it starts laying down compact bone, and this is where you get that epiphyseal plate. So so after we turn it, as you can see, the bone grows, the spongy bone grows, the vessels coming in, the vessels grow in and whatnot to bring, because you need nutrients and then taking away the waste, so you need those, capillaries and everybody coming on in, those venules and those arterioles coming in. So anyway, and again, you get the two ends, epiphyseal parts growing in the spongy, and then around that they start laying down the compact bone. And you'll notice again that epiphyseal plate. That plate stays there for a very long time, and that is the growth plate. It's also known as the growth plates of your bones. So my son still has his. If he looked at his bones magically in Miss Royal's magic school tank, because I don't want just a school bus. I want a school tank. Anyway, for reasons. Anyway, so long story short with cheese. So anyway, his are still growing, so they can still grow. And that's what we actually get really worried about with kids. If they break one of their bones, we get really scared because we do not want them to break their epiphyseal plates. Because once that's broken, it actually stops growth, and then that bone, or that end of the bone, won't grow anymore. And we have to do some pretty drastic things to get it to, lengthen with the child, which is not cool. So when kids break their bones, we get really scared, and we literally check those epiphyseal plates on the bone. Like, if it's going through the middle, okay, cool. Not really, no, it's still painful, and I don't like seeing kids cry, but, I'm just saying, we make sure that those things don't get damaged, because if an epiphyseal plate gets damaged before, it's done doing its thing, it stops, turns into an epiphyseal line, and then there's no more growth, and then you've got uneven bones, and that's not cool. So, yeah, that's why I'm harping on why the epiphyseal plate is so important to the growth of the little people, and I mean the younger type children things. I have one, yeah. So talk about bone remodeling. So I just went up the stairs here, and already probably my bones are going, all right, that was smooth. So what's going on is you get, from doing any type of exercise, this happens all the time, and your bones are always constantly remodeling. Like I said, we're doing this constantly to the point where you have practically a new skeleton every 30 years, which is insanely impressive. So what happens is, remember I told you about these guys, these osteocytes hanging out in their lacunae, and they're all their little dendrites sticking out, and they sense a little micro crack, and then they go, oh, I'm micro crack. It is time to fix it. So what they do is they start out and they go, hey, osteoclasts, come on in. We need you to carve out the area with the micro crack. And that's what they do. So we get pre-osteoclasts, they come in, they attach, they turn active, and they start reabsorbing the area that had the little micro fissure in it. So these little guys scoop out the area with the micro crack until they get down to, not cracked area. Then there's these mononuclear cells. These are the guys that are basically sitting there going, all right, you need to stop. Because if somebody doesn't tell these guys to stop, they won't stop, which is a problem in space, and I'll get to that in a minute. So these guys stop because these guys are watching them. So they say, hey, you got it, stop. So they disengage. And then these guys basically call in the pre-osteoblasts, and the pre-osteoblasts lay down, and they, underneath them, form new bone matrix. And then these guys, interestingly enough, get trapped in there, and they turn into new osteocytes. So again, this gets remineralized, the osteoblasts kind of like die off, and these guys get trapped in their own new lacunae, those little holes, and they become the ones that get to watch again to see if there's another, little fissure that needs to be fixed. And this is happening constantly in your body. So we have the osteoclasts coming in, scooping out the damaged areas, and then these guys watching to make sure they don't scoop out everything. And then these guys come down and lay down new bone matrix, and these guys become new osteocytes to watch and maintain the stability of your bones. Pretty crazy, huh? So, now, what was I saying about space? Well, unfortunately, in space, microgravity does something kind of stupid. For some reason, it turns these guys off. We don't know why it does this, but these guys don't work very well in space. These guys work great. A little too great. So, for whatever reason, this kind of turns on your osteoclasts, and they just keep reabsorbing your bones. But these guys just sit there and are like, and don't come in and lay down new bone formation without you getting pretty crazy with them. This is actually why astronauts actually have to exercise constantly in space to actually activate these guys. That's one of the few things that actually reactivates them somewhat, but you can't be exercising 24/7 up in space. We've got things to do up there. Like science. Anyway, so we've got to figure out a way to tell these guys to knock it off, and so to tell these guys to come back and turn on. And it's actually quite interesting because before we go, we put astronauts into space for any length of time. We actually put them on a regimen of drugs that is basically the same regimen we give 80-year-olds for their bones, for their osteoporosis. I'm not kidding you. They're put on that level of osteoporosis drugs to combat the osteoclasts going crazy, which is just insane. So that's one of the things we've got to figure out before we can go out into space for long periods of time, like go to Mars and whatnot, is how to fight against the bones just literally eating themselves while you're in space. They just start, they're not disintegrating, they're just atrophying. Does that make, that makes sense. Atrophying, yeah. So, we need to figure out a way to calm these guys down and turn these guys on while we're in space. And the only two ways we know to combat it right now is literally just, putting people on osteoporosis drugs and making them exercise quite a bit. So if you ever wonder why astronauts exercise in space, it's not just to stay healthy, it's actually to fight against this, which is something that's kind of interesting, what our body does in microgravity. There's other things too, and as I go along in this course, I'll point these things out as well, because I like space and I'm still waiting for NASA to hire me. NASA! Anyway, he goes over this too. Good stuff. He goes over remodeling. All right, there we go. So that's the first half of Chapter 7 with bones. So I'll see you in a moment with part 2. So